So there's a big problem. If you're anything like me, most of the suffering you probably go through in life stems from you just caring too much about other people's emotions and just shouldering around the emotional baggage of other people. That heavy load, those emotions that aren't even yours, is probably slowing you down. For me, walking around with unhappiness, shame, and guilt occupies our minds where we can't stop thinking about it. Not sure if you ever went through this, but this is the exact problem that's stopping us from doing our best work and really just being our true selves. At the end of the day, you're not an emotional bellhop, and we're not responsible for other people's emotions. I'm definitely not a guru at this, but the good news is that there's a way to stop absorbing other people's feelings like an emotional sponge. And today I just want to share what really helped me navigate both my emotions and other people's emotions without being a complete asshole. Before we start, shout out to Dr. Nicole LePera and Cole Hastings for just sending me down this rabbit hole and really inspiring this video today. So how do you know if you're actually absorbing other people's emotions? On one hand, you don't want to be a complete narcissist, right? Self-absorbed and be a complete asshole. But on the other end, are we just taking on too much burden that isn't ours? And so I want to ask, is this you? When you're around certain people, do you ever feel like you're walking on eggshells because you don't know when they are going to blow up on you? Do you ever feel this guilt trip or responsibility on your shoulder for not managing other people's moods? Do you find yourself, and this is me, playing therapist, quote, without the pay, always trying to fix things when they go hot and cold on you? Do you default to people pleasing when conflict comes up? And are you spending sleepless nights predicting how others might react to your every action? If this feels all too real and you're wondering, hey, Kevin, how do you know what I'm actually going through? It's because I've been, and sometimes I'm still here. I've been in the trenches, and when I was actually thinking about this topic, I was thinking about different examples in my life where I kind of experienced this. And you might relate to a few of these too. So the first area I noticed this was my parents, especially my dad. So I grew up in an Asian household with my dad struggling with undiagnosed PTSD from the Vietnam War. Sometimes he'd be super warm, loving, other times he would snap suddenly. And it really didn't take that much to set him off. Like if I closed my bedroom door, he would yell at me for hours. And as a kid, I blamed myself a lot for my dad's anger. His unpredictable mood swings and irrational anger just taught me to really tiptoe around and try to do my best to be perfect, be the best Asian son and make him proud, hoping that would keep the peace and not piss him off. But no matter what I did, it really didn't matter. The second area I noticed was dating. So as I grew older, I began dating, and I dated some ABGs. Dude, I'm such a sucker for that. I mean, who isn't a sucker for tattoos, fake lashes, heavy makeup, and avoidant attachment styles, right? I noticed in certain relationships, we go from really passionate sparks to passive aggressive fallouts like post honeymoon phase, right? And whenever my ex was really upset, I'd feel this sense of passive aggression, this uneasiness when I would bring it up. Nothing was wrong, but we clearly knew something was wrong. It got to a point where I felt like I was walking on eggshells. I didn't know what would set her off, and I would feel the need to fix everything. Eventually, I built resentment over time, and I just felt like I couldn't be myself anymore. The third area, clients. So in the crazy world of high ticket sales and paid ads, that's kind of like my world. You could feel the frustration on the bad months from certain clients, especially the younger, the ClickFunnels bro type of clients. They would often blame us, blame the team, blame me, even though it was out of our scope of work. I felt in those times of need, I had to do whatever it took to make the client happy for validation or acceptance. But at the end of the day, they weren't my dad. They weren't my parents, right? I noticed during these situations, my default habit was people pleasing because it was my attempt to control how others perceived me. And this tactic really kind of caters to the three basic needs that we have. We want control, we want acceptance or connection, and the third thing is consistency, even if it's really, really toxic sometimes. That's why some people stay in these destructive relationships at times too. And no judgment against that, that's just human nature. But what I realized was acts like people pleasing or doing things that we don't actually want to do actually traps us in a destructive victim savior cycle that ultimately builds long-term resentment and ultimately kills a lot of relationships, even my own, both business and intimate relationships too. But the biggest realization was that I was the red flag. Dude, it's kind of like that moment where you look at the mirror and you're like, oh, that is me. Sometimes I was the avoidant. I was a gaslighting boyfriend. I would be the passive aggressive one in my relationships. I remember before this period where I really discovered attachment styles, my insecure attachment style was running rampant all because I didn't know how to tactfully like communicate my feelings, my emotions, and really just learn the art of mindful communication. And looking back, I didn't know what I didn't know. Like, I don't think a lot of Asian parents will teach you like, oh, this is how you tactfully communicate. Usually they just yell and beat your ass, right? And while it may not be our fault, the older I get, I realize that it's our responsibility to transform our relationship with other people's emotions and better communicate our feelings too and what we're actually thinking. But why does this even matter in the first place? And when we can detach our responsibility from other people's emotions, few really great things happen. Some of the things I noticed was that we no longer fall victim or slave to other people's emotions, because when you're easily emotional, you can be easily manipulated, which leads me to the second point. We can become immune to manipulation. We can also avoid that toxic victim savior cycle, right? One person is trying to save the other person and the other one's the damsel in distress. Very common for nice guys like myself. We can unconditionally support our loved ones. We do things just because we want to, not at the whim at because how someone's feeling. We can respond thoughtfully and intentionally instead of reacting very impulsively. It's kind of like those world star hip hop moments. Like when you react to things tend to not go as well. But the most important one is you can stop being a Captain Save-A-Ho to your ex-girlfriend who lost all respect for you because you neglected your own needs as a people pleaser. Fuck, that's personal. So how can we bring about this change? Do we need to go on a meditation retreat, seek out ayahuasca fueled enlightenment, or dive straight into therapy? Maybe. All these tools I found, except for ayahuasca, I haven't done that yet, but all these tools can be helpful. But what I found most helpful, the simplest way, is like a simple reminder can just help us shift out of our people pleasing habits and just being aware of it. Because at the end of the day, you're not dealing with children, you're dealing with adults. Here's 7 reminders that I use to remind myself that I'm not responsible for other people's emotions. And by the way, shout out to Dr. Nicole LePera for really inspiring some of these. Number 1, adults can be in a bad mood without something being wrong. When I look at those moments I was telling you, my dad, my ex, my clients, they were often in a really, really bad mood. Just like all of us, we're all human. But feeling irritated, being in a bad mood, or just feeling down is just a natural part of being a human. And this is just like a gentle reminder that it just has nothing to do with you sometimes. That's what I like to tell myself. Someone's mood and you making them upset are mutually exclusive. They have nothing to do with each other. And remember, people often project and displace their own feelings all the time, and even us as well. Another thing I realized was a person's mood isn't something that needs to be fixed. So when I was in therapy, I noticed that I would always try to fix myself whenever I felt sad or upset, and it just made me very, very uncomfortable. Whether it was a breakup, getting fired, and just feeling like life happening, I would do this all the time. I would just try to escape from my emotions, and I would escape by just fixing things like most bros, right? When I was like really, really in the thick of things, especially post breakup, I remember reading books like When Things Fall Apart and The Power of Now, Untethered Soul, and it always reminded me that our thoughts and feelings aren't our identity. They're not who we are. Feelings are just part of the human experience. They come and go just like the ABGs in my life. If you feel a sense of anxiety or panic when someone is in a negative mood, just notice it. And I like to always ask myself, like, Kevin, do you need any support? What would support look like for you if you need it at all? And if they say no, just give them their space. Which leads me to the next thing. Adults can handle disappointment. I remember this moment when my ex-girlfriend broke up with me in LA and I was so heartbroken in that like 300 square foot apartment that I had. I remember the time where I got fired from my pharmacy job because of this YouTube channel, and I thought my life was over. I remember my dad passing away and feeling like, dude, my childhood, all those memories that I had one-on-one with him, died with him. And sometimes life just happens. When things don't go as planned or someone is let down, that's okay. We have to remember that adults are capable of being disappointed. And sometimes the best way to support someone is just trust in their capability to deal with life and not treat them like a child, because no one wants to be treated that way to begin with either. Another thing I realized was that other people's issues are their responsibility, not yours. I remember in high school, I remember fighting with my ex-girlfriend, Nancy, who ultimately I think ended up cheating on me. I remember we had these fights and I would have to read her mind and she would have to read mine. It was the dumbest thing ever. And I'm honestly cringing so bad as I'm reading this out loud. And the reason why I bring up this story is because like it really shows the difference between how children and adults handle conflict. We're not in high school anymore. If someone has an issue with you or to bring up, they'll come to you. If they don't, assume that there's no issue, because mature adults come to someone when they have an issue or problem. Something I've been more mindful about is not rewarding passive behavior or trying to pull things out of people. And that goes for us well. Sometimes we just need to trust in their ability to communicate. And what I find for myself was like, because I wasn't very good at communicating, I would actually be very passive, or I would wait for people to pull things out of me. This goes for us as well. Another thing I realized was, don't act on other people's emotions, just notice them. So something I realized through meditation and therapy was like, noticing someone's emotions is very different from like absorbing it. One of the hardest things for me in therapy when I first started was like noticing, not acting, not trying to fix everything. And it took me a long time to understand, because like, why wouldn't you just fix things? I think the thing is like, especially when we're dealing with other people, it just ignores our human need to be understood. How many times have you been given unsolicited advice by friends, family, or even a teacher or something like that, and you're like, dude, I've already done that. At that point, we just feel so misunderstood. And if you ever been in those moments, even if that piece of advice was really, really solid, have you ever felt the resistance to just be like, no, I'm not going to do it? And that's our ego sometimes, and it's there to protect us, right? So it ignores this human need to be understood. And like I was talking about with those world star hip hop fights, usually reacting to a situation, especially when it's like emotionally high stakes, is always worse than just sitting with your feelings, take the time to process them, and then intentionally acting on them. So something that really has helped me is just to start noticing, realizing that I'm the observer, and really saying to myself like, hey, it seems like, this person's upset, down, or off. I can see that they're really taking the time for themselves. I can feel differently and just go about my day, and we can talk when they're in a better place. That gentle reminder always helps me. But what happens when you're actually like physically with someone? When you're living with someone, living with a loved one? What can you do in those situations? Another reminder is change rooms. You can always come back. Sometimes the feels hit really, really hard. For example, like there was this girl I was dating a long time ago. We got into a heated fight. I remember like we went to bed upset and all that. And I was just like, I woke up early that morning, super early, like 5 a.m. I was like so pissed. I had to leave back and come back home. And eventually we talked about it when we came back, but it's okay if you need this too. If you feel like you're absorbing someone's emotional energy and it's distracting, take yourself into a different room or get some time outside. Do something enjoyable or relaxing so you don't just go into rumination and just imagining the worst possible situation in that overthinking loop. It's not running away from your problems, but it's being able to calm yourself down so you don't have to do anything reactively. You can do everything with intention, and you can always come back. This is the most important lesson I learned. Cut yourself some slack. As a chronic perfectionist, I always want to get things right. I want things to be perfect, but the truth is you're going to suck at a lot of this. Like I still suck at this sometimes too. I'm not on my A game. And as you're learning this new skill, I think it's important to be compassionate with yourself. So learning the soft skill of communication is hard. You're going to make some mistakes, and that's okay sometimes, because people who are in the habit of emotional monitoring, like you watching this video or me, we often had to take care of a parent. Maybe we were the family peacemaker. Maybe we lived in fear of another person's reaction, like my father. And so be kind to yourself as you kind of unlearn your old survival instincts. But it leads me to this last point too. Knowledge isn't enough. See, it's great to know these concepts, but it's a lot more empowering to just apply these concepts directly. So by being able to communicate how we feel, how we actually think, what's going on our side, I think we can start feeling a lot more free, and we can start living a more authentic life to us, be ourselves, and just build deeper connections. I'm not sure if you ever went through this, but like sometimes when you're in an argument, people have makeup sex after, the connection just feels a lot more deeper because you're able to work through things. You almost get this dopamine rush from emotional tension release. And if you still feel stuck or really, really overwhelmed learning these skills, something I always try to remember, Alex Hormozy always talks about this, but all of us are works in progress. In 500 years, none of this will matter anymore. Our fights, the relationships with people will all be gone unless AI takes over. But the thing is, we all die. So why not spend our time just working on the skills, like living more authentically, being ourselves, freeing ourselves of unnecessary emotional baggage and like resentment. And if you want to experience all these emotional liberating feelings, it starts now. Whenever you're in a rut, bookmark this video, revisit it if you need a reminder. So are you ready to walk it? If so, here's another video that the algorithm thinks will help you. Stay compassionate, stay authentic, stay rebellious. Peace.